South of Midnight brings the South to you in a way that feels authentic from an outsider's perspective. It's time to take a deeper look at Hazel's journey to save her mom and the people and creatures she runs into along the way. I'm Logan Keller with Xbox Expansion Pass, and this is the review for South of Midnight. Thanks to Compulsion Studios and Xbox for providing the review code. This review and all its footage was captured on PC with an AMD Ryzen 9 7950X with 64 gigs of RAM and an NVIDIA RTX GeForce 4080 Super at 1080p with DLSS on. Settings were set to Ultra with unlocked frame rate. With a shift from winter to spring comes tumultuous weather. Hurricanes are expected, and during this time, most folks down south begin to prepare for evacuation. The fear of losing everything is ever present, but objects can be replaced, while human lives cannot. That's where our story begins. Hazel and her mom, Lacey, are getting ready to evacuate to a local church that's run by the character you'll meet later in the game. That's where our story begins. Hazel and her mom Lacey are getting ready to evacuate to a local church that's run by a character that you'll meet later in the game. Given the annual nature of the weather, it's not surprising that Hazel and Lacey are concerned, but not panicked by the storm. Instead, the rush to get things done dredges up resentments that have been built up over the years. Trey, Hazel's father, passed when she was 4, leaving Lacey to raise Hazel alone. Not the whole time, but enough of it that it's clear Trey was never replaced. As the two get ready, an argument breaks out, and Lacey tells Hazel to check on her neighbors to make sure they're safe and ready for the storm. It's not long before the floodwaters rise, taking with it Lacey and the raised trailer home Hazel and her live in. While Hazel is unable to catch up to the trailer, she starts to notice weird things around her. She sees strands of white around the world and a large creature in the background that manages to appear thanks to the lightning silhouetting the figure. This is where Hazel finds her way to her grandmother's mansion, up past the Prospero cemetery where her father is buried. Scared, her mother is lost in the river and might not make it through the night. She pleads with Bunny, Trey's mother and Hazel's grandma, to call for search and rescue. Services are shut down during the storm, and Hazel is told to rest till morning. This is where the story sets off, with Hazel taking on the responsibility of finding her mother. Resolute, Hazel finds that the world she knew is not the same. Stories she heard growing up aren't just stories, and she's going to have to learn more about the people of her town and sing about helping them on her journey. For me, the story of Hazel and her mother was the carrot on the stick to get me moving. But it was the stories of mythical creatures that really drew me in. Each one is unique in its situation, but similar in being painful. While I want to talk about how each story stirred my emotions, I know that experiencing them unspoiled is far more rewarding an experience. There are a handful of stories tied to creatures that you'll come across, and each one feels like it's ripped from ghost stories told around the campfire. This was the highlight of the game for me. Everyone has a past, but not everyone talks about it. And the line between good and evil is not a clear path. With each chapter, I was impressed with the deeper understanding of who the people in Hazel's life are, as well as others whom she'd never known, but still had an empathy for. There are quite a few characters in South of Midnight, and the game does a good job of presenting their relevance at the time you meet them and within the lore section of the menus. Hazel, as the protagonist, does an amazing job of dealing with the shift in reality as she starts to understand that she's what people call a weaver.
Down in the deep south, folks spin tales about the grand tapestry, an invisible weave holding our world together. They say the grand tapestry is torn by folk sorrows, and these damaged threads give rise to them evil spirits called Haints. But every great while, a mighty storm brews, awakening a powerful force. A weaver, gifted with the power to reach into the past and mend folks' deep wounds. With enchanted hooks in hand, this weaver can banish Haints and reweave the tapestry's thread, restoring the land so life can bloom again, fresh and new.
Compulsion did an amazing job with the writing for all the characters, as well as hiring actors who gave a stellar performance. Catfish ended up being my favorite. Not just because he's the narrator and makes me think of Ray from The Princess and the Frog, but because he is concerned for Hazel as the two quickly become friends. I won't spoil the other mythical creatures because I think it's important that you get to experience them for yourselves. But rest assured that each one is important and worth the time. Other than Hazel, Lacey, and Catfish, the other character I think worth noting is Bunny. There is a lot to uncover about this woman, and it explains the distance between her and Lacey after Trey's death. So much of the game is built around the Flood family, an apt last name given the history in Prospero. Yet some of the more interesting characters like Jolene, Laurent, and Itchy ended up being footnotes in the margins in Hazel's story. I think what was missing in some cases is resolution, but it's understandable given Hazel's motivations. The music in South of Midnight is on point and probably up there with one of the best soundtracks for a game I've listened to. The game's audio does well to have words whispered with each spell you spin. Something I don't think I've ever seen done in a game is having songs that tell the tale of each cryptid. From the tale of Benji to the tale of Two-Toed Tom, you learn what happened the further you progress. As you collect different parts to a pattern needed for the creature, new verses are being added as you progress to fill your magic blue bottle of pain. One thing I did have trouble with when listening to the game on speakers was that I couldn't make out some of the words. This was alleviated when I switched to a headset, but unfortunately, the subtitles for the game don't give you the lyrics. And yes, I was actually that invested in the music that I wanted to read the lyrics while I was playing. Even towards the end of the game, the audio design was well done. This game feels like a movie in so many ways, and the full symphony being used here contributes to that. This is an album I'll be adding to my Spotify playlist. The different parts of Prospero are fully realized and give you a genuine sense of culture here. From the slave quarters of a sugarcane plantation to the flooded countryside where sunflowers and pig farms were cultivated, you'll see deep forests, swamplands, marshes, mountains, farmsteads, and a few more that I don't care to spoil. The graphics here are stylized, but still hold a bit of realism with their design. Houses feel lived in, and nature has overgrown abandoned areas. Nothing is pristine, and I wouldn't expect it to be. One thing I didn't mention with the music is the audio for the environment. You can hear critters and insects as you move around the world. There's life everywhere in the audio, and you rarely find yourself moving to an area where there isn't something sounding off in the background. It's most evident when you move into a combat arena. There's an audible shift, as if you're locked into this small zone and it feels completely separate from the world that you were dealing with earlier when you try to take out some of the Haints. These are angry creatures that are born from the damaged strands or stigma from the grand tapestry. I'll dig into more of these later on when I go into the combat. As you move from chapter to chapter, you'll need to work on clearing echo knots that are represented by stigma vortexes. These slow spinning tornadoes look like they're made from lace as they funnel down into one spot, which you'll need to clear as you weave a pattern for later use. The design here is clear that there is a side path and a storied path as you wander around. A guiding strand will always whisper your name and tell you where to go, but you'll need to run around the world on the side paths to collect floof. These will become important as you work through the talent tree for the game. I found the traversal and platform in the game to be loose. You can mantle if you grab the edge of a tree limb or the side of a rock, and the game does a good job of indicating climbable areas without using yellow paint, while combat is relegated to arenas. There are still hazards you'll need to work around if you want to collect enough floof for upgrades. Thankfully, the game has more than enough, and I almost maxed out everything in my talent tree on my first playthrough. I can see folks who have trouble with platforming getting slightly frustrated here, but overall, I think they did a good job making possible paths evident without expecting you to go out of your way to figure out how to get somewhere. You may also consider this a negative in that they hold your hand too much and block off areas with slippery geometry or invisible walls. One small tease that I'll share is tied to an ability you get in Chapter 4 or 5 that allows access to parts of the world that Hazel isn't able to get to. These little side missions aren't everywhere and serve more as a light departure from the main game. Once in a while, they'll become necessary for story progression, but if you feel like they're not worth doing, it's not something you're burdened with too often. I thought they were cute, and I kept an eye out for them as I went from area to area. I don't know what words can do justice to Compulsion's ability to craft an atmosphere that makes me feel like I'm traveling from Louisiana to Georgia. It's a fresh take on a part of my country that showcases a life I've never gotten to experience before and drives me to consider experiencing it in person. Now that I've waxed on about how good the game looks, sounds, and feels, I want to dive into the part that I think will disappoint folks the most, the combat. This is where I can say Compulsion plays it safe here. Hazel uses her hooks, spindles, and one special ability I won't spoil to dispatch Haints of different types. With each story you work through, you'll discover a new enemy type. They'll vary in style and type enough to given the length of the game, but I wouldn't expect a vast number of spells or abilities from them. The game offers 4 presets for difficulty. I played as the default Weaver, as this is where I expect the studio balances things for most folks. But there were times I had considered bumping it up to its hardest difficulty, Grand Weaver. The 2 below Weaver are Scryer and Healer, with Scryer being the story mode. There is a custom option as well if you'd like to go in and tweak the settings. I'll talk a bit more about this with the accessibility later on. As with each fight, you'll need to use your abilities to push, pull, weave, aka bind, and the secret spell to eventually put each type of Haint into a status that will allow you to unravel them. If you ignore them in this state, they will eventually come back and you'll need to fight them again. Each Haint has a normal attack, which tend to be telegraphed, and a yellow unstoppable attack that will deal damage if you don't get out of the way. Health in the game doesn't regenerate on its own, so you'll need to unravel Haints to get a portion of life back, with 1 health coil in each arena to refill your health. Once all the Haints are taken care of, you'll have access to unraveling the knot and dispelling the stigma in the area, restoring the grand tapestry and bringing life back to the zone. While playing through the game, I was introduced to a lock-on feature that I felt hindered more than helped, as it will keep you focused on one enemy at a time. You can switch between them with input, but often it was easier to keep the camera free and have a better view on all of the enemies. While I think this is the weakest part of the game, it is still a solid aspect. I think most folks will be fine with the Weaver difficulty, and I still used all of my talents and spells in each fight. While you could just get away with spamming attacks and dodging, I enjoyed weaving enemies to take them out of the fight for a while pulling another to me and smacking them before pushing them away. There is a gameplay loop at play here, and while it feels formulaic, I wasn't bothered by it thanks to the story and atmosphere. After you complete enough combat arenas, you'll have unraveled echo knots, which are a story-based knot that you'll need to create a pattern before you enter the boss battle. These are a bit of a mixed bag as well. Some will involve combat while others won't. There are some standout examples of good design, but others will leave you feeling like they were rushed or not well planned out. Overall, I enjoyed them, but much like combat, they were in service to the story. Compulsion has these as a way of engagement, but at no point did I struggle with these. I think I died a couple of times throughout the game during combat until I worked out the pattern and finished with ease. A Dark Souls game, this is not, and I'm happier for it. I will say I wasn't fully satisfied with the ending boss fight. I think there was better fights earlier in the game, and this one fell short in my eyes as the big baddie wasn't as compelling as an adversary I wanted that I talked about earlier on. With combat comes spells and talents. These are straightforward and offer you enough tools to deal with the moderate threats the game has to offer. A general path down the talent tree will help augment your basic rend attack. Besides having a basic attack and a heavy attack, you'll be offered 4 common spells to use. I've mentioned these a bit with Weave restricting an enemy, Push and Pull, and my favorite, Secret one. Each ability can be upgraded as the story progresses in chapters, offering more strengths, resets on cooldowns, or lasting longer. Given each arena will get progressively harder, spending floof on these upgrades will serve you well, but ultimately make combat even easier in the long run. This brings me to accessibility, something I think is mandatory in reviewing for South of Midnight. After working on the game a while, I decided to go into the settings to find subtitles for the music. While I didn't get what I wanted, I noticed a few options I rarely see in games. The basics are all here with a wide palette for color profiles depending on the color blindness, as well as menu narration. HUD and navigation are available, and you can adjust a lot with the sensitivities when it comes to the control sticks. The real interest here has to deal with gameplay, both general and combat. Here they've allowed you to not only adjust the lock-on features, but skip combat altogether. This even includes boss fights. I tried this out just to get an idea of how the game plays, being that combat is required to progress. When this is turned on, you can skip any combat when you enter an arena by hitting the prompt button. You have to confirm each time you want to skip, though. Boss battles are separate from this, but can be turned off as well if you don't want to do the boss fights. If you do want to do them, but don't want to take damage, there are options in the custom difficulty to turn on invincibility for Hazel and another character. This makes it much easier for folks who find it difficult to participate in combat sections of games and usually have assistance otherwise. It's not going to be for everyone, but it will make South of Midnight available to a larger group of people who normally may not be able to play it. That brings me to the last feature I want to make sure gets addressed: the stop motion nature of the game. The design from the start has been talked about and in something that people will find as an obstacle, given how prone folks can be to motion sickness. This is something you can turn on and off at will for the actual gameplay. Cinematics will retain the stop motion nature of the art direction, however. I found myself swapping between on and off during my playthroughs and didn't find it distracting. While I know this is an artistic choice from the studio, I appreciate that they've taken the time to make sure it's not a restriction for the game. All in all, I think Compulsion has done everything they can to make sure people get to the end of the game here. The game comes in around 10 to 12 hours, and honestly, I feel like that is a pretty fair number. For my time with the game, I love the world and the story crafted here. The combat served its purpose, but didn't do anything special for me. There is a game design loop that repeats itself more than I think it needed to. When looking at the game as a whole, however, I think Compulsion did an amazing job here. Never have I felt so connected to the history and culture presented. If you love tragic characters and stories and action platformers, this is a must play.